Okay, joining us now, other side of the aisle from Geneva, Switzerland, Democrat Chris Coons. He sits on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and attended the Munich Security Conference. And Senator, thank you for being with us today. I want to get to all the foreign policy stuff, but let me pick up there where Senator Britt left off. Do you think that there are good faith negotiations going on? She says, listen, we've sent counters back and forth. She's trying to have conversations with folks on your side of the aisle. Will it happen?
Well, one of the folks she talked to was me, so I'm sort of struck that Katie didn't mention our recent conversation. Yes, there are efforts underway to negotiate in good faith between Democrats and Republicans in the Senate. But let's be clear what's at issue here. ICE agents, Border Patrol agents, shot and killed 2 American citizens in broad daylight in Minneapolis. That's what caused thousands of Delawareans to call my office. That's what caused millions of Americans to stay. We need to find some standards of conduct to make sure that as ICE and CBP do their jobs as part of federal law enforcement, that they're doing it in a way that comports with how policing should be done in a democracy. They ought to wear body cameras. You ought to be able to know that they are law enforcement and what agency they're from and have a name or a badge number. If they're trying to get into someone's home, they have to present a judicial warrant. That's the Fourth Amendment. And there should be some clear standards for transparency and accountability if there's a use of force incident. Shannon, I was responsible for most of a decade for the second largest law enforcement agency in my state. And the county police department that I was closely involved with followed very similar standards. And in talking to current and former law enforcement leaders and colleagues who've been attorneys general or been involved in law enforcement in the Senate, I don't think our expectations here are too great or too difficult, and I think we should be able to make progress on setting these standards in statute soon.
Well, we played a little bit earlier one of your Democrat colleagues in the show, John Fetterman, who said every Democrat knows that what you're doing right now has no impact on ICE, at least to the funding part of this question. It is about the things Senator Britt talked about, TSA and FEMA, Secret Service, Coast Guard, those kinds of things. So fair to say that what you're doing is not stopping ICE from operating. I mean, they're fully operating during this partial shutdown.
Yeah, let's be clear. In the so-called Big Beautiful Bill last year, Republicans gave ICE $75 billion. In total, they gave DHS more than the Marines. So they're not going to shut down in the next couple of days or weeks or, frankly, years. But the outcry from Americans has caused the White House to be willing to negotiate with us on reasonable standards of conduct. That's a positive. We need to see that get into statute before we vote on this last piece of federal funding. And just for your viewers, 97% of the federal government is currently funded, open, and operating. So this isn't a big government shutdown. It is a hopefully temporary disagreement over the standards of conduct of the officers who operate under the Department of Homeland Security.
Well, we hope those conversations will continue. I want to get to the foreign policy stage where you are, Munich and now in Geneva, where we understand trilateral talks with Ukraine, Russia, the U.S. are going to continue this week. My understanding is, correct me if I'm wrong, you were to have a conversation or a meeting with Mr. Zelensky in Munich. If you did, how did that
Yes.
go? And, you know, some of the reporting out of that is that he's agreed they will have elections. There's been a lot of pressure on him. They need to do that. But in exchange for a true 2 to 3 month ceasefire with Putin. What was your conversation about that you can share with us?
Thank you. That's roughly correct. And as we come up to the 4-year anniversary of Russia's brutal aggression, its broad-spectrum invasion of Ukraine, it was inspiring for us to spend an hour with President Zelensky. He presented recognition and thanks to a number of senators who've worked hard on supporting Ukraine. Part of why I was in Europe and many of my colleagues from the House and Senate were here was also to thank our vital NATO allies who have really stepped up. They are dramatically increasing their defense investment, their burden sharing, and they've taken over virtually all the cost of supporting Ukraine. But the war grinds on. Putin continues daily to bomb civilian infrastructure. The people of Ukraine are struggling through one of the coldest winters in modern memory. And when our president welcomes Putin on a red carpet in Alaska and tries to negotiate peace with him, Putin's response has been clear and fierce and brutal. He bombs and bombs and bombs with missiles and drones civilians in Ukraine. So, frankly, the message from our bipartisan delegation was simple and clear to President Zelensky. We want to put more pressure on Russia through sanctions. We want to bring Putin to the table by raising the cost of his continued war. And we want to put pressure on the other countries, Iran, North Korea, and China, that are supporting this ongoing brutal war where there's been so many war crimes committed, so many Ukrainian children kidnapped and taken back to Russia, and so many people losing their lives. 35,000 Russian troops died on the front lines in December for less than a kilometer of progress by Russia. It genuinely is a stalemate, and the Ukrainians remain strong, fierce, and firm in the defense of their democracy and their freedom, and we should stand with them.
Yeah, and a lot of hopes pinned on those talks this week for some actual concrete progress in that conflict. I want to talk about Secretary Rubio's speech there in Munich, because a lot of people were still smarting from what they heard from Vice President Vance last year. It seemed like a very different tone. Politico even called this a Valentine to our European allies from Secretary Rubio. He talked about, we want to work together. We have to work together. We need for you to be strong, for all of us to have success. He talked about the common bonds, but he did talk about this issue, which is a debate here domestically, but internationally too. He talked about the issue of borders. Here's what he said.
We must also gain control of our national borders. Controlling who and how many people enter our countries, this is not an expression of xenophobia. It is not hate. It is a fundamental act of national sovereignty. And the failure to do so is not just an abdication of one of our most basic duties owed to our people.
I wanted to say this is an urgent threat. He said mass migration is destabilizing a number of countries and cultures, and that there is some acknowledgement among some of our European friends and allies. What do you make of that point?
So two things, Shannon, if I might. Yes, the idea that we need to control our borders and that nations need to control migration, I think is widely agreed in the United States and in Europe. But where he went with this point next was somewhat concerning to me. He talked about the threat of civilizational erasure, and he talked a great deal about the shared legacy history of civilization between the United States and Europe. He talked a great deal about our shared commitment to Christianity and to European culture. But I think he spoke more loudly by what he didn't say than what he did say. He didn't call out Russia as the aggressor against Ukraine. He didn't call out the PRC, Communist China, as the aggressor in the Western Pacific. And he didn't say that the urgent challenge of the moment, given that North Korea, Iran, China, and Russia are increasingly partnering and working closely together, is for the United States and our democratic allies around the world, whether it's Korea, Japan, or Australia, Europe, Germany, France, Italy, the UK, Poland, that it is urgent for us to come together as free market, free societies committed to democracy. His focus on the civilizational ties between the United States and Europe left a number of folks in the audience who I spoke to later who are trusted partners from Japan, from Korea, from India, democracies that the United States has long partnerships with. It left them somewhat cold, and frankly, it was more reassuring than J.D. Vance's speech last year, which was more of a punch in the mouth. But it failed to meet the moment, given that we are just days away from the 4th anniversary of Putin launching a full-scale and brutal invasion of Ukraine.
All right, Senator Coons, we have to go. Can you give me a yes or no on whether you plan to attend the State of the Union this year?
I am planning to attend. Look, frankly, last year was a very difficult speech, and I'm hopeful that President Trump will find a way to speak to all Americans, not just to his political base. That's the challenge for a president in a State of the Union.
It is. All right, Senator, safe travels. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shannon.